In this next beginner's video, we're going to teach you how to cut Andamooka Matrix Opal on a Lapidary Arbor, like we do.
Cutting by hand a piece will take you a few hours, but on an arbor it should only take about 10 or 15 minutes. We use a lower tone 6-wheel Lapidary Arbor.
Let's get cutting. The first step is to get your template and mark where you want your opal to be. Tip for new players, use a mechanical pencil to get nice, accurate lines. Now we start with the 100 grit to take away anything that's outside your line.
Notice here when I'm cutting the shape out, I'm angling it just slightly so that the cut line doesn't go beneath the drawn line. It's just flared out at the bottom slightly. The exact same process with these next two. Maybe we'll speed it up just a little bit. Just essentially cutting off everything that's outside the line, making sure that the cut doesn't go beneath the line. Fire. Grab them with some tweezers. Make sure that the right side is facing up. Warm that up just to the part where it starts to steam. Don't get it any hotter than that. You don't want it boiling, you just want it warm enough to be nice and malleable. Right there on the end of the stick. And you put your stone over the fire. Topping wax will not stick to a stone that is wet. Some people do this dry, but if you do it from when it's wet, you can see when it evaporates. 3 or 4 seconds later, that's going to be about 70 degrees. Warm the wax up, flip the stone over, stick your stick. Now with a damp finger you just want to press around the side of the wax there so that as much of that wax touches the stone as you possibly can. You want a nice little cone running from the stone all the way up to, a quarter of an inch or a few millimeters above the stick. And you dunk it in some water and spin it around and make sure that it's even whenever it spins. And it'll help you get a perfect dome on it. It's not quite right, you can put it back in the flame and warm it up just a little bit and keep playing with it until it's perfect. Now here's a close-up of me daubing one of the stones. With these big stones, I like to get them wet, and then once they're wet, I can watch the water evaporate off of the top of them. Now, on a big stone like this one, once the water is gone, the top of the stone is about 65 degrees and the bottom of the stone is about 70 or 75 degrees, which is just the perfect temperature to melt the green wax. Now we're at about 3, 2, 1. Now the stone is the perfect temperature to put the green daubing wax on it. Now once the opals are on their sticks, this is where we start to get the rough shape of the cabochon. So I'll use my 100 grit wheel on the arbor to take off that corner and to just start to get the dome formed before I move it on to the finer wheel. The stone that I'm cutting here is all treated Andamooka Matrix, so you can see as I start to cut it, the darker color starts to come off of the stone. That's why it needs to be retreated. And sometimes even my stones fall off, especially on this rough 100 grit wheel. The friction with this wheel vibrates the stone pretty hard, so sometimes they'll jump off when you're doing the initial shaping, and you just have to redom them.
Once we have the rough shapes done, we move over to the 230 grit sintered wheel to refine the shapes. Here we're taking out the facets, or little ridges, that form on the shoulder, between the dome and the sides of the opal.
For the first 7 or 8 years I had this arbor, I was cutting with electroplated diamond wheels. And whenever I started cutting opals for a living instead of just for a hobby, my electroplated wheel started to wear out, so I decided to invest in some diamond sintered wheels. And I tell you, I always thought they were pretty much the same thing, but the difference between cutting on a wheel that is electroplated and a wheel that's diamond sintered is chalk and cheese. This wheel is one of the best things that's ever happened to me. It's 5 millimeters of steel that's been impregnated with diamond grit, and they're more expensive. They're 3 or 4 times more expensive, but the cut that you get on them is just so absolutely clean. It just makes something that used to be really hard into something that's just an absolute joy. Now the cutting is all done, we start with the 280 grit Nova wheel to start the polishing process. Always spinning, always moving. We're just trying to take out the scratches from the previous wheels here. Check out the red flash on this stone. It's so bright that you can see it in the reflection of the water on the wheel. And now we move up to a quick polish on the 600 grit Nova wheel. Now for Andamooka Matrix stones that we're going to treat, 600 is as high as we go. This is the point where we need to take the stones off, do the backs of them, and then do the treatment process. 10 minutes in the freezer will pop those stones off the sticks easily. Now once we pull them out of the freezer, we just dip them in the water, give them a second to warm up, and they'll just pop off just like that. Now before we treat these stones, it's really important to clean up the backs of them. We clean up the very back and make sure there's no wax on them. And we also clean up the bottom corner to make sure that it's rounded off. This will help make sure that there's no chipping at any point with the stone. Now once you've cleaned the back and taken the bottom corner off, these stones are now ready for the treatment process, which is going to darken the matrix and make the opal really stand out.